The hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing as the plane cruised effortlessly above the clouds, bathed in golden daylight that streamed through the oval windows. It was an ordinary flight, one of those journeys where passengers had settled into the predictable rhythm of air travel, some scrolling through their phones, others flipping through in-flight magazines, and a few already lost in the steady pull of sleep. In row 12, Emma, a young woman with an air of quiet composure, had leaned her head gently against the headrest, her breathing deepened even as she slept peacefully, unaware that fate was about to thrust her into the most extraordinary moment of her life. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, checking seatbelts, offering beverages, and responding to the small, everyday needs of travelers. Children whispered and giggled in the rows behind her, while an elderly man adjusted his glasses, trying to read in the soft glow of daylight. Everything felt calm, secure, and entirely unremarkable. Yet in the cockpit, beneath the polished calm that passengers took for granted, tension was brewing. The captain and his co-pilot exchanged glances, their faces taut with the kind of professional restraint that masked deep concern. Something had gone wrong, something mechanical yet critical enough to demand immediate attention. A sudden medical emergency had struck the co-pilot, leaving the captain burdened with both flying the aircraft and managing the unfolding crisis. He tried to maintain composure, his hands steady on the controls, but he knew the truth. Flying a jet safely across continents required 2 trained pilots, not one exhausted captain battling uncertainty alone. As the crew scrambled to assist the stricken co-pilot, a decision was made, one that would ripple through the cabin and change the course of the journey. The captain picked up the intercom, his voice firm but lined with urgency. Passengers who had been lulled into relaxation stiffened at the tone, their ears straining for meaning as the words carried through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? If there is a licensed pilot on board, please make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately." Silence fell over the cabin like a sudden storm. Heads turned. Murmurs began. Parents pulled their children closer, and some passengers exchanged looks of disbelief. The question, so out of place, so heavy with implication, reverberated in their minds. Why would the captain be asking this unless something was seriously wrong? Emma stirred at the commotion, her brow furrowing as she drifted from the calm of slumber into the rising wave of tension around her. She blinked, trying to shake off the fog of sleep, as snippets of conversation reached her ears and words like emergency, pilot, and problem. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but from the unmistakable pull of responsibility, a sense that her peaceful anonymity was slipping away. The cabin, once filled with ordinary routines, now throbbed with unspoken fear, each passenger grappling with questions they dared not voice. The crew moved quickly, their professional masks intact but their hurried footsteps betraying the urgency of the moment. In row 12, Emma sat up fully now, her eyes sharp, her demeanor calm even as panic quietly brewed around her. She knew deep inside that everything was about to change, and that she, the woman who had been nothing more than a silent sleeper in row 12, was about to be thrust into the center of a story that no one on that plane would ever forget. Emma sat upright in her seat, the remnants of sleep clinging to her mind as her senses sharpened to the uneasy silence that had descended across the cabin. She could feel the collective anxiety of passengers rippling through the rows, as if the captain's request had punctured the invisible bubble of security everyone had trusted so deeply. A child whimpered somewhere in the back, hushed quickly by a mother who forced a fragile smile, while in the front a businessman muttered under his breath, "This can't be real." Yet it was real. The announcement was no in-flight joke, no idle precaution. The captain had spoken with a voice that carried urgency, and Emma knew enough about flying to understand that no captain would ever break protocol in such a way unless circumstances were desperate. She pressed her hands against her knees, steadying herself as thoughts collided in her mind. For years, Emma had carried a secret, one she never boasted about, one she buried beneath the simplicity of her life. She had once trained as a pilot. Life, with its unpredictable turns, had pulled her away from that path, forcing her into a world of different responsibilities. Yet the training and discipline still lived within her, etched into her memory like muscle bound by instinct. She had not flown a commercial aircraft, but she had logged hours in the cockpit of smaller planes, studied the manuals, drilled procedures until they became second nature. The thought of stepping forward now, of revealing this hidden part of herself, made her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. Fear, doubt, but also resolve. Around her, passengers were whispering, scanning the cabin with wide eyes, hoping for anyone to stand up and say, "I can help." Seconds stretched, every heartbeat amplified by the quiet desperation. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the weight of responsibility was too immense for anyone to bear. And in that stillness, Emma felt the familiar calm that had guided her through life's challenges. The same calm that once steadied her during moments of personal crisis. The same calm that silenced panic and cleared her mind to think. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself against the flood of uncertainty, and let the truth settle inside her. She could help. She might be the only one who could. Her eyes drifted toward the aisle, where a flight attendant stood, her face carefully composed but her fingers twitching with nervous energy. The woman's gaze scanned the rows, searching, silently pleading for a miracle. Emma raised her hand slightly, then more firmly, her voice even but soft as she spoke. I have flight training." The words, though quiet, carried like a spark through the tense air. Heads turned sharply, eyes locked onto her. Relief mingled with disbelief flashing across faces. The flight attendant rushed toward her, kneeling beside her seat, whispering urgently, "You're a pilot?" Emma hesitated only briefly before answering with honesty. "I've trained, not commercial, but I've flown. I understand controls, procedures, navigation. I know enough to assist." The attendant's eyes widened, her breath hitching with a mixture of hope and desperation. Without another word, she signaled to her colleague, and within seconds Emma was being guided toward the front of the cabin, the murmurs of passengers following her like a tide. Some whispered prayers, some muttered doubts, but all eyes clung to her as if she had suddenly transformed from an anonymous sleeper in row 12 into the fragile thread between them and catastrophe. The walk felt longer than it was, each step echoing in her mind like the countdown of a clock. She reached the cockpit door, its presence both familiar and intimidating. The barrier between fear and control. When the door opened, the smell of electronics, metal, and pressurized air enveloped her, pulling her instantly into a world she had once known intimately. The captain turned, his face etched with exhaustion and strain, his uniform dampened by sweat, his eyes sharp but undeniably weary. He scanned her quickly, sizing her up not just as a passenger but as a potential lifeline. "You've flown?" he asked, his voice low, steady, but edged with urgency. Emma nodded, her tone unwavering. "I'm not licensed for commercial, but I know procedures, systems, navigation. I can help you." For a brief moment, silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the steady beep of instruments and the low roar of engines. The captain studied her, his mind weighing the risk of letting an untested stranger into the heart of his responsibility against the equally pressing risk of continuing alone. Finally, with a short nod, he gestured to the co-pilot's seat. "Then sit. We don't have time to argue. I need another pair of hands." Emma slid into the seat, her heart pounding but her face calm, her fingers brushing against controls that felt at once foreign and familiar. Memories surged. Hours of training, the hum of simulators, the sharp voice of instructors drilling commands, all rushing back like a tidal wave. She adjusted her headset, her eyes scanning the instruments, recalling procedures she had practiced years ago. The captain rattled off the situation, his co-pilot unconscious, the aircraft mid-route with turbulence forecast ahead, a diversion necessary but complicated by weather patterns. Emma listened intently, nodding, absorbing, her mind calculating, her composure unbroken. "Tell me what you need," she said simply, her voice steady. And with that, a fragile but powerful partnership was forged. Two pilots, one trained and seasoned, the other carrying the memory of discipline and skill long buried, united in the cockpit as hundreds of lives depended on their ability to remain calm under pressure. Outside in the cabin, passengers clung to hope, unaware that the woman they had barely noticed in row 12 was now seated at the controls, guiding their fate. Inside, Emma steadied her breathing, her fingers resting lightly on the controls, and whispered silently to herself, "Stay calm. Focus. You've done this before. You can do it again." And in that moment, she stepped fully into the role destiny had thrust upon her. The sleeper awakened not by chance but by purpose. The cockpit felt like another world, sealed away from the murmurs and fears of the cabin, a place where time narrowed into flashing indicators and steady beeps. where every second mattered and every decision carried weight, and Emma, though her heart raced beneath the calm facade she projected, felt herself sinking into a strange clarity as she adjusted her headset and absorbed the captain's words. The aircraft, a massive machine of precision and power, was cruising at 36,000 feet, but complications had stacked against them. The co-pilot had collapsed mid-flight from an apparent medical emergency, leaving the captain alone to manage a heavy workload. Weather conditions had shifted suddenly, with reports of turbulence and a storm wall developing along their path. And to make matters worse, fuel reserves demanded a rerouting to the nearest viable airport, one not originally on their charted course. Emma listened, her brain sifting through information like gears clicking back into place after years of disuse. And though doubts whispered at the edges of her mind, what if you fail? What if you make a mistake? What if lives are lost because of you? She pushed them aside, focusing on the rhythm of procedure, the way she had been trained to think step by step. The captain, though visibly strained, spoke with clipped precision, guiding her through tasks. But soon he began to test her knowledge, asking for readings, requesting adjustments, watching closely to see if she could truly shoulder the responsibility. To his growing astonishment, Emma responded not like a nervous passenger, but like someone who belonged in that seat. Her hands moved with familiarity across controls, her voice steady as she confirmed altitudes, recalculated headings, and scanned for weather patterns. "You've done this before," the captain muttered almost to himself, as if incredulous that the woman plucked from anonymity in row 12 could so seamlessly merge into the heart of his cockpit. She didn't answer, only gave a brief nod because words would only distract from the intensity of the moment. Then, as if the sky itself sought to test her resolve, the first jolts of turbulence struck, rattling the plane with sudden violence, causing overhead bins to shiver and passengers in the cabin to gasp. The aircraft shuddered, dipping sharply before the captain steadied it, his jaw clenched tight, his knuckles white against the yoke. Emma braced herself, recalling every lesson drilled into her about turbulence. Keep calm, trust the instruments, adjust gradually, never overcorrect. "Wind shear ahead," she said, scanning the radar, and the captain shot her a sharp glance that quickly turned into a nod of respect. She was right. The storm wall had appeared sooner than forecasted, towering columns of thunderclouds bristling with invisible currents that could tear into their stability. Communication with air traffic control was patchy, static crackling across the headset. And though the captain relayed their emergency, the response came fragmented, urging them to divert toward a secondary airport that required threading through a narrow corridor between storm cells. It was risky, immensely risky, but it was their only chance. "Can you handle nav?" the captain asked, his voice taut but tinged with something new, a recognition of her capability. Emma swallowed her nerves, eyes locked on the glowing display. "Yes, tell me what you need." And so it began. She monitored instruments, called out adjustments, calculated bearings, cross-checked fuel estimates, and in every motion, she felt the years of lost practice returning, not as perfect memory but as instinct fused with determination. Outside, lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the endless expanse of sky in stark, blinding brilliance, while raindrops began to pepper the windshield, streaking across the glass as the turbulence worsened. The cabin behind them rattled, voices rising in fear. But in the cockpit, Emma and the captain forged a fragile bubble of control, a rhythm born of trust and urgency. Each lurch of the aircraft tested her nerves. Each sudden drop threatened to unravel her focus, but she clung to calm, repeating silently in her mind the mantra that had guided her through past trials. Breathe, focus, one step at a time. The storm grew fiercer, the plane rocking violently, alarms chirping as crosswinds buffeted their course, and yet, in the midst of chaos, Emma felt an odd serenity, as though fate had led her to this exact moment, as though the years she had buried her training for had been waiting to resurface in the one instant it was needed most. She met the captain's eyes, and in that shared glance no words were necessary. He knew she was no longer a passenger playing at Bravery, but a co-pilot in every sense of the word, carrying lives on her shoulders as surely as he did. Together they steadied the aircraft, inching it through the storm corridor, battling nature's fury with human will and discipline. And in those moments Emma discovered a strength within herself she hadn't realized still existed. A strength not just of skill, but of courage, resilience, and the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The roar of engines filled the cockpit like a primal growl, shaking against the furious winds that lashed at the aircraft as though the storm itself sought to tear the metal bird from the sky. And Emma, gripping the edge of the console with one hand while her other adjusted dials with meticulous precision, felt every nerve in her body ignite with both terror and determination as the situation spiraled toward its climax. Lightning clawed across the horizon in jagged arcs, illuminating rolling thunderclouds that towered like mountains of wrath, and each flash cast fleeting glimpses of the captain's hardened face, his jaw locked, eyes fixed ahead, sweat dripping down his temples despite the chilled air. The storm corridor they had committed to was narrower than expected, crosswinds hammering the fuselage, rain slamming the windshield in sheets that streaked the glass and blurred their view, while the instruments screamed with warnings, overspeed alerts, turbulence advisories, proximity alarms as if the machine itself had lost faith in its ability to survive. Passengers cried out in the cabin behind them. Trays rattled loose. An oxygen mask dangled midair from its compartment. But here in the cockpit, Emma's world shrank to numbers. Coordinates, instincts, and the steady mantra in her mind. Breathe. Focus, adjust, survive. The captain barked commands, but soon it was no longer a matter of him leading and her assisting. Instead, their roles melded into a partnership. Two pilots fighting as one against the storm's rage, her voice cutting sharply across the din as she read bearings, recalculated altitudes, and warned of approaching downdrafts she spotted in the radar patterns. At one point the plane dropped violently, as though yanked downward by invisible claws, and screams filled the air, but Emma's hand shot forward correcting their pitch, steadying the descent before it could spiral into disaster. The captain shot her a look, not of doubt, not even of surprise anymore, but of respect, as though acknowledging that without her, this fight would already be lost. But then, just as they pierced deeper into the storm corridor, disaster struck. A sudden burst of lightning slammed near the aircraft, the flash blinding, the sound like the sky itself cracking open, and in the next instant, the cockpit lit red with alarms as one of the navigation systems flickered and died. The screen stuttered, warning signals howling, and for a moment the captain cursed under his breath, gripping the controls with white knuckles. "We've lost partial nav," he shouted, straining to stabilize their course. Emma's mind raced, training and memory colliding in a storm of their own as she reached for backup systems, calling out, "Switch to secondary instruments. I'll cross-check manually." She pulled data from what still functioned, recalculating headings by instinct and procedure, piecing together fragments of information like shards of glass, her voice unwavering as she relayed corrections. The storm buffeted them relentlessly, but she found her rhythm, her training returning with razor-sharp clarity, and step by step they clawed their way forward. Yet the storm was not done with them. Turbulence hit again, harder, tossing the aircraft like a toy, the cabin rattling violently, and Emma felt her stomach lurch as the nose pitched downward. Fear clawed at her. But beneath it something stronger rose, the voice she had once silenced within herself roaring back to life. "You are a pilot. You are not powerless. You belong here." With that, she steadied her hands, made the adjustments and brought them back level, ignoring the chaos outside and focusing only on the instruments, the feel of the machine, the heartbeat of the engines that responded to her commands. Minutes stretched like hours as they fought through the storm, battered but unbroken, until finally, through a brief break in the thunderclouds, Emma glimpsed it, a sliver of clear sky on the horizon, a promise of escape. Her breath caught, hope surging through her veins, and she pointed, her voice fierce with certainty. "There. Head 20 degrees starboard. Climb to 38,000. We can break through." The captain didn't question. He followed her lead, trusting her as much as he trusted his own instincts, and together they willed the aircraft toward the gap, the engines straining, the turbulence clawing at them one last time before. With a shudder and a roar, they broke free. Suddenly the storm was behind them, left raging in the distance, and in its place stretched a vast, calm sky bathed in sunlight. Clouds parted like curtains, revealing a stage of brilliant blue. In the cabin, passengers erupted into relieved cheers, tears streaming down faces, hands clasped together in prayers of gratitude. But in the cockpit, Emma only allowed herself a single long exhale, her body trembling with the release of tension, yet her mind sharpened by the knowledge that the journey was not yet over. They had survived the storm, yes, but they still needed to land this aircraft, and the responsibility weighed as heavy as ever. The captain turned to her, his expression softening into something almost reverent, and said in a voice low but steady, "You just saved this plane. Don't ever doubt that." Emma met his gaze, her own eyes fierce but glistening, and replied, "We're not done yet. Let's bring them home." The moment of truth had arrived, and every fiber of Emma's being hummed with a mix of adrenaline, focus, and a calm certainty that had been forged through the turbulence, chaos, and crisis that had preceded it. The plane, now free from the wrath of the storm, stretched ahead like a massive steel bird gliding over a patchwork of farmland and rivers. But despite the blue skies and sunlight glinting off the clouds, the task ahead was anything but simple. The landing would require precision, courage, and an almost instinctive synchronization with the captain who had come to trust her beyond measure. As they approached the nearest airport, Emma's eyes darted across every instrument, scanning altitudes, airspeed, flap positions, and wind readings, her hands moving with fluidity and deliberate intention across controls that had once been foreign, but now felt like an extension of herself. The captain, seated beside her, spoke quietly but firmly, issuing instructions that were followed with unwavering precision. Yet he allowed her to take the lead where possible, watching her responses and corrections with a mix of astonishment and pride. Passengers in the cabin had no idea of the precise calculations and split-second decisions that now determined their fate. They saw only the bright sunlight, the illusion of calm, and the occasional clench of hands gripping armrests, unaware that the woman who had been asleep in row 12 was now orchestrating their safe return to the ground. Emma's mind raced, yet her focus was singular, filtering out every distraction, every thought of fear, every tremor of uncertainty that threatened to intrude, and instead centering on the rhythm of the aircraft, the patterns of the runway, the wind currents that could tilt their descent, and the alignment required for a perfect touchdown. Communication with the tower crackled intermittently, air traffic control issuing clearances. But Emma knew that the real challenge lay in integrating their instructions with the storm-altered wind patterns, the residual turbulence, and the untested limits of her own recall from years of training. With a soft, measured breath, she guided the plane into the glide path, adjusting flaps, throttles, and rudder with precision, calling out each step as if narrating a choreography in which every motion was life-saving, every correction pivotal. The captain's voice was calm but laced with intensity. "Steady, steady, keep it aligned." Emma's eyes flicked between the runway indicators and the horizon, each second a lifetime, each foot of altitude a decision of consequence. The landing gear extended with a mechanical hiss, a sound that both reassured and heightened tension, and she felt the subtle shift in the plane's balance as weight transitioned toward the wheels, the vibrations coursing through the fuselage like a living pulse. Outside, the sun glinted off the tarmac, highlighting every stripe and line she needed to follow, every marker that dictated a safe descent. Passengers murmured anxiously, sensing the gravity of the moment even without understanding the technical mastery unfolding in front of them. Emma's hands moved instinctively, yet every motion was conscious, every adjustment a deliberate act of life-saving precision. She felt the aircraft kiss the runway, the landing smooth but not without minor jolts as the tires met resistance and the engines roared in controlled deceleration. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from triumph, tinged with the realization that the lives she was responsible for had been entrusted to her skills, judgment, and composure. The captain exhaled audibly beside her, a rare smile breaking across his face as he muttered almost in disbelief, "You did it. You actually did it." Emma allowed herself a brief nod, her gaze sweeping the cockpit one last time to ensure everything stabilized, then turned her attention to the cabin as the plane slowed, tires screeching softly against the tarmac, brakes applied, and passengers erupting into relieved applause, tears, and laughter that mingled with the residual tension still lingering in the air. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, faces beaming with gratitude, ensuring everyone remained seated until the aircraft reached the gate, and passengers whispered among themselves, speculating about the calm, heroic figure who had somehow ensured their safety. Emma, still seated in the co-pilot's chair, let herself relax fractionally, breathing deeply, feeling the culmination of fear, tension, skill, and courage wash over her like a tidal wave. In that moment, the woman who had been asleep in row 12 became not just a hero in the eyes of those aboard but a living testament to the power of composure, training, and decisive action under unimaginable pressure. News of the event spread like wildfire, first among airline staff, then across social media, and finally to news outlets worldwide. The story of a passenger turned co-pilot saving hundreds from potential disaster captivated hearts everywhere. Interviews followed, accolades poured in, and the world marveled at her courage and quick thinking. But Emma remained humble, attributing success to teamwork, the captain's guidance and calm thinking rather than her own singular heroism. Yet Alexander Grant, who had been watching from afar, could hardly contain his astonishment and pride. The woman he had noticed for her quiet intelligence and courage in ordinary life had now performed an extraordinary act that literally saved lives, proving herself in the most intense real-world scenario imaginable. The world recognized her bravery, but to Emma, the moment was about understanding her own strength. The knowledge that calm, clarity, and courage could turn the tide in moments when all seemed lost. The plane finally reached the gate, engines winding down and passengers filed off slowly, faces still pale from adrenaline but now lit with gratitude and awe. Cameras flashed, hands reached out to shake hers, and the murmurs of disbelief and admiration followed her like a soft wave. The captain turned to her one last time before exiting the cockpit, a profound look in his eyes. "You saved everyone today. Don't ever forget that." Emma smiled softly, exhaustion and exhilaration intertwining, knowing that the journey from row 12 to this moment had transformed her life forever. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unimaginable, yet emerged not just intact but triumphant, proving that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, could rise to heroic heights. As sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating her face and the gleaming fuselage around her, Emma realized that she would never again see herself as merely a passenger in life's journey. She was a pilot in every sense, and of planes, of decisions, and of destiny. And the world, finally, would never forget the woman who had been asleep in row 12 when a captain's voice changed everything.